Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In the next few minutes, Mark Zuckerberg, the 33-year-old billionaire chief executive of Facebook, will begin hours of questioning in front of a joint Senate committee. He's expected to apologize for allowing the data of more than 87 million of its 2.2 billion users to be used by Cambridge Analytica without their knowledge. What the senators will want to hear is why it took Facebook so long to admit the error and what they're going to do about it now. Let's go to our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris, who's actually inside that joint committee hearing.
John, we're in room 216 of the Hart building. You might be able to see the photographers gathered down below me. They're just waiting for Mark Zuckerberg to appear in the next few moments. As you say, the architecture of the room is interesting, though, because there are places set effectively for 44 senators. So these are two committees who are holding this joint hearing. So Mark Zuckerberg is going to face a relentless test, potentially over the next 4 or 5 hours. We believe the hearing will begin with both of the committee chairmen, first of all, making their statements. Then we'll hear an opening statement from Mark Zuckerberg. We have some sense of what he will say. There is pressure, I think, for him to go beyond what he's always stated, which is what he's already stated, which is that these were mistakes on his watch. He's apologized for them. He says Facebook is going to do more to try and protect users' privacy. But I think that idea that apologizing over and over again will somehow make this go away certainly won't play here. Beyond that, he's going to face 5 minutes questioning from each one of those 44 senators. They have lots of questions to ask. They're under pressure from their own constituents to make a case for a better protection of privacy, but also on a parallel issue, which of course is Facebook's involvement in the 2016 election, the fact that Russian propagandists were able to buy space on Facebook and get out their messages, the fact that fake news flourished during that campaign. They wanted Mark Zuckerberg to appear here last November to answer questions about that. At that time, he sent along one of his minions rather than turning up himself. Today, he may have desperately wanted to avoid this. The last time we heard from him in an interview, he said that he'd send along the appropriate person. But as it's turned out, he is the appropriate person and no one else would do. What do you have to say to Facebook users who are finding out today that their data has been harvested?
There's no way to fix the privacy settings for this. A reluctant Mark Zuckerberg, now in the full glare of the camera lights, centre stage for his congressional grilling.
How are you going to restore
It's
trust?
a measure of the scale of the crisis now facing the tech giant he helms that he's here at all. But in a few short weeks, he's had to move from denial to damage control.
Why did you say there are only 270,000 people affected in the beginning, Mr. Zuckerberg?
3 weeks ago, it was revealed that Cambridge Analytica had obtained the data from some 50 million Facebook profiles via a personality quiz app. At the time, Facebook responded, saying the profiles of 270,000 users and their friends were affected. But last week, we discovered just how many friends when they admitted that 87 million people may have had their data shared, including an estimated 1 million Brits. And that a further 2.2 billion users may have had their publicly available Facebook data scraped through their phone numbers and email addresses.
Mr. Zuckerberg, don't your 2.2 billion users deserve some kind of an explanation, sir?
There will be pressure on the Facebook boss from Senate committee members today to draw a line, to reveal whether there were other Cambridge Analyticas, to tell the whole truth of how many users might have been affected, and to describe, finally, how it was that they opened the door to Cambridge Analytica to access a tranche of personal data on such a massive scale. Early indications from Senator Bill Nelson, the senior Democrat on the Commerce Committee, who met with Mark Zuckerberg yesterday, is that mere contrition won't do.
He said they were lied to by Cambridge Analytica. Well, you can't protect our privacy just on the basis of somebody telling you that they're going to protect it. So does that mean law? Yes. Does that mean regulation? Yes.
3 weeks after the revelations of former CA consultant Christopher Wiley on this program and in the Observer and New York Times newspapers, Facebook has begun to notify users whose information CA might have obtained without their knowledge. It's done Facebook style, with a page that flips up to welcome you as you log on to your account. Even as they begin the formidable task of chasing the data, we now have a clearer sense of how Cambridge Analytica worked in multiple US elections. As late as 2015, it was pitching its so-called unique social media data to multiple Republican election campaigns. Which begs the question, what data? CA insists it wasn't from Facebook. It now says together with a different company called Cint, they generated new data sets from a survey of over 40,000 users with their consent. In previously unseen CA documents from that year, they pitched their services. They say that they use unique behavioural data to create psychographic profiles and message concepts, that they can utilise vast amounts of social media data and overlay with voting records to enrich individual voter files. And they boast about their previous work assisting Republican candidate Thom Tillis in North Carolina during the 2014 midterms. It says, we produce clusters of voters based on the model data to maximise campaign impact, which enable the creation of tailored messages directed to specific voter groups. Tailored messages delivered straight to your Facebook feed to persuade you personally, based on your psychographic profiling, that the Republican candidate was your only choice. It's something George Orwell might only have imagined, but Cambridge Analytica rendered it real in North Carolina. Here's how.
North Carolina deserves a better senator than...
If you were judged to be agreeable, you saw this version of now National Security Advisor John Bolton appealing for you to vote for Thom Tillis.
Please join me in supporting Thom Tillis.
And if you were judged to be neurotic, well, the message was downright dystopian. Same candidate, same state, different Facebook user.
Knowing what you know now, would you use Cambridge Analytica again?
I don't know. I have to, like I said, I'm getting to the facts.
Knowing what you've heard about what they've done with other campaigns?
I don't act on what I've heard about. I act on facts.
Thom Tillis won that North Carolina race and is now in the Senate. Not only that, he's on the Senate committee interrogating Mark Zuckerberg today. And just a few seats along, Ted Cruz, another senator who hired Cambridge Analytica. Do you regret ever dealing with Cambridge Analytica, Mr. Zuckerberg? CA continues to deny any wrongdoing. Throughout, Facebook has been at pains to distance itself, painting them as a rogue data analytics firm. But their people worked side by side in a small office in San Antonio on the Trump campaign in 2016. Here's Trump campaign digital boss Brad Pascal explaining Facebook's role.
I asked each one of them by email, I want to know every single secret button, click, technology you have. I want to know everything you would tell Hillary's campaign plus some. And I want your people here to teach me how to use it.
Inside?
Yeah, I want them sitting right next to us.
How do you know they...
Even as Facebook staff were seated right next to Team Trump, seated in the next office was the top team from Cambridge Analytica. CA says none of their ill-gotten Facebook data was used on that campaign. But the question is, did Facebook ever ask? After all, they knew the company had accessed the data back in 2014 and in 2015 asked them to delete it. Even as Cambridge Analytica pitched so-called unique social media data to American politicians.
Zuckerberg, shouldn't someone resign over this?
Mark Zuckerberg says he's the boss, he bears responsibility. But as one senator has described it, the apology tour is over. This afternoon, he needs not only to show he can atone for mistakes months or years later, but that his company will intervene to protect users' privacy before it can be abused in the first place.
Kylie Morris reporting. Well, now, earlier I went over to this building here, to the Rotunda, and I caught up with Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, himself a seasoned prosecutor, who'll be one of those quizzing Mr. Zuckerberg. I spoke to him about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, and also about the FBI raids on Donald Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, which the president has denounced as a disgraceful witch hunt. I asked him first, what more than an apology does he want to hear from Mr. Zuckerberg today?
Much more than the apology tour or the contrition sonata is necessary here. What I hope and expect is a definite, specific commitment to action. And more than just voluntary cooperation, I think there need to be rules of the road, and Facebook needs to promise it will cooperate and support such rules with outside scrutiny and oversight.
Do you think we even know, have they even been honest about the true scale of this? I mean, when they started out, they were talking about 230,000 profiles having been compromised. Now they're talking about 87 million. And it could go on. I mean, when are we going to reach the real numbers here, if ever?
Whether because they don't know or because they know and they're concealing it, they have failed to come clean with the American people and the world. They have no idea who specifically the users are, whose information has been scraped and sold by Cambridge Analytica. But even more troubling, they have no idea how many other Cambridge Analyticas there are out there, other app developers who have similarly misused information that they have taken from users. And that fact is deeply troubling. They have no idea when they're going to know that information, when they're going to disclose it, when they are going to take action that will prevent it in the future. And that's why the time for trust has passed. It can no longer be trust us, or we're sorry we made a mistake, we'll do better. Now there has to be government action, intervention, rules of the road, again, much like the Europeans are doing to protect privacy.
Now, this is a difficult question to ask you, but two of your fellow senators asking questions today, Ted Cruz from Texas and Tom Tallis from North Carolina, engaged Cambridge Analytica in their campaigns. Should they really be asking questions in this hearing?
Anybody who is asking questions here perhaps should disclose their past personal involvement. They are senators representing their states. They have a right to ask questions. And Facebook is a very prominent and powerful force in this country, and so are others in the tech industry. But we're at a moment of reckoning. We're at a high noon for Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, and all of us have an opportunity and an obligation to stand up and speak out.
One last question, and it's on a different subject, and that is the FBI entering the lawyer of President Trump, his office and his home. Is this a very serious development in your mind? I mean, this is pretty unusual for this to happen to a serving president.
This development is more than serious, it's seismic. It's a nuclear strike with multiple warheads that puts the president directly in the crosshairs of the entire Department of Justice. There are many ramifications here. It could not have been conducted without multiple layers of approval, without direct evidence of a crime, and the potential for obstruction or destruction of justice that required immediate action to raid that home, office, and hotel room. The reason for this raid has to be much bigger and broader than one possible affair of the president or even a payment to her. It has to involve other kinds of specific federal crimes.
Well, now let's go back to Kylie Morris, who's inside the room where these hearings with Mr. Zuckerberg are going to be heard this afternoon. But in the meantime, there is another story gripping Washington at this moment. Donald Trump dismissing the FBI raids as a despicable witch hunt and even an attack on America. So let me ask you, Kylie, these raids on his lawyer, on his lawyer's home and the hotel where he stayed at some point, how serious is all this?
Well, I think probably the headline from the Washington Post gives it away, John. They've likened this to someone putting a bomb on the president's front porch. I mean, this is the Mueller inquiry coming ever closer to the president, and I think that's possibly why we've seen this very emotional reaction from him, at least if you can read emotion via tweets. But he's obviously very angry, very upset about this. As you say, he's using that language, calling it a witch hunt, which he's done before, but today it was in all caps with about 7 exclamation marks. I mean, this is a man on whom he depends, who he's worked with for decades, and who is very much a keeper of his secrets. So presumably, if there is any moment upon which the lawyer Cohen decides that he wants to share information and cooperate with the Mueller inquiry, that would potentially have a massive impact on the president. It's also, of course, around town boosting suggestions that maybe the president will move against Robert Mueller and that he will sack him. We know that he wants to sack him. He's talked about it enough. But as yet, he hasn't found the means or found the political support to do that. I think certainly this action, though, by the FBI means that Robert Mueller's future is suddenly looking slightly shaky again, and certainly the president is paying attention.
Well, now, in the meantime, what's happening in that room there? I mean, any sign of Mr. Zuckerberg?
Well, not quite yet. I've got to say the seats in the public gallery have completely filled up. There are a couple of people wearing fantastic large sunglasses. They've been holding up signs saying, you know, stop corporate spying. So obviously there are quite a few privacy activists here, but there are also lots of staffers of senators milling about. They have a big job today. Not many of these senators are necessarily completely au fait with issues of data scraping and privacy. They've been briefing their senators. They want their senators to ask the most impactful questions they can in the 5 minutes they have. So a lot of preparation has gone into this, but no sign of Mr. Zuckerberg just as yet.
Thank you there, and we'll come back to you the moment things get underway. But in the meantime, I'm joined by Mindy Finn, a digital media strategist who worked for former President George W. Bush. She's a co-founder of the non-partisan organization Stand Up Republic. Now, let's just look at the political implications of what's going on with Facebook. And we're all talking about the technical things which have allowed the harvesting of information about individual Facebookers. Sure. But what about the politics of it? Do people now believe Mr. Trump basically is in the White House thanks to carelessness by Facebook?
I think some believe that. They certainly believe that Facebook played a role. You know, at the same time, Facebook is a platform that's made up of people and their words and their actions and engagements. And so it's not just about Facebook, it's about the actions that people were taking on Facebook, the information they're sharing and posting there. But the fact that foreign actors were able to come in and exploit data and target Americans, and they did this obviously in the UK and other countries as well, with messages to exploit their fears, or as in their own words, to create fears that didn't previously exist. This is nefarious activity. And I don't, you know, for most Americans, I don't think they look at Facebook as the sole factor that led to Donald Trump's election. Clearly, there were political beliefs already at play that Facebook was used as a platform to exploit, but it certainly played a role in the election of Donald Trump, and a much bigger role than I think certainly the platform was willing to own right away. Facebook right away said it was ridiculous to think that they were a critical factor in electing a president, when in reality what they sell to their advertisers is they are a critical role in being able to elect politicians.
Well, now, do we blame Facebook's naivety or Facebook's, well, I mean, perhaps worse than that?
It's a combination. I believe, you know, for a lot of these founders, they come in with these big dreams and this big vision. And for Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, they had this techno-utopian kind of view of the role Facebook would play, and they saw it playing very democratizing, having a very democratizing effect around the country, allowing businesses to thrive that couldn't have thrived before, people to connect with others they never would have. And they saw all this as a positive force for good. And as they started to see signs of, you know, the cracks in that that halo started to fade a little bit, it took too long to come to grips with, to reckon with the negative impacts that their platform was having. And so there's willful ignorance, I would say, more, and some delusion more than maliciousness, but certainly they can be blamed for taking too long to come to grips and reckon with the role they played.
Well, we're looking at things further with you later, Mindy, but for the moment, thank you very much. Well, now, breaking news here in Washington, that inquiry and investigation into Facebook here on Capitol Hill is about to get underway. Straight back now to Kylie Morris.
John, Mark Zuckerberg's just poured himself a glass of water. He's taken his seat at the desk directly in front of all these committee members, all these 44 senators. He's just being welcomed at the moment by Chuck Grassley, who's the senior chairman on the committee. He walked in quietly through a side door. He had to sit for a moment, a kind of slightly tense, pressure-packed moment where he was surrounded by photographers. Remember, he is not a very public figure. He doesn't appear in public. He certainly doesn't relish speaking publicly. So it's an unusual sight, really, to see him out so exposed in such a venue. Perhaps we can hear a little of what Chuck Grassley is saying now.
We will begin with opening statements from the chairman and ranking members of each committee, starting with Chairman Thune, and then proceed with Mr. Zuckerberg's opening statement. We will then move on to questioning. Each member will have 5 minutes to question witnesses. I'd like to remind the members of both committees that time limits will be and must be strictly enforced given the numbers that we have here today. If you're over your time, Chairman Thune and I will make sure to let you know. There will not be a second round as well. Of course, there will be the usual follow-up written questions for the record. Questioning will alternate between majority and minority and between committees. We will proceed in order based on respective committee seniority. We will anticipate a couple short breaks.
Okay, so we'll bring you a little more of this hearing later on, obviously, but at the moment, Chuck Grassley just kind of laying out the procedural landscape here and what Mark Zuckerberg will face over the next few hours. But
Thank
for
you,
now,
Chairman Grassley.
Back to you, John.
Today's hearing is extraordinary.
Well, whatever happens in that committee room, the technical challenges are massive. I'm joined from San Francisco by Jessica Lessin, founder and editor-in-chief of the tech news website The Information. Jessica, they can call for regulation. They can call for all sorts of things for Facebook. But this does present challenges that nobody's ever faced with anything the size of Facebook. Talk us through it.
Absolutely. I mean, really on trial today, if you will, is a question of how you govern the internet and how a company with 2 billion users should be governed. And this is a big question, and I think it's going to take a very, very long time for Congress in the United States and then other governments throughout the world to really figure it out. I think today is mostly about public opinion and perception, about Facebook trying to rebuild trust, about Silicon Valley trying to rebuild trust in Washington, but it's going to be a very long road to figuring out what that practically means.
Well, you're a very tech-savvy person, but did you ever imagine that the internet, that Facebook in particular, that Analytica, Cambridge Analytica and the rest, could ever be put to the use that might perhaps threaten the very essence of democracy itself?
I personally did not anticipate that, but I believe that Facebook should have. I mean, we've seen this company have, rocket-sized growth. And I think a lot of blind spots. And what's interesting now is that Facebook and Google and many other tech platforms are realizing that their idealism and thinking about all the wonderful ways the technology could be used needed to be coupled with a real realism. And I do believe the companies will get there. I believe that the leadership wants their technology to be used as a force for good in the world. The question just is, in this cat and mouse game between the bad actors and the tech platforms, who can come out ahead? Facebook has really underinvested in this and spent the past weeks hitting us with announcement after announcement about how they're going to invest more. So I think they will make progress, but it's not something you solve. It is really a back and forth, and it's going to be a real escalation of resources throughout the tech community to face these threats.
Jessica Lessin, thank you so much. Let's go straight back to the committee room and Kylie.
John, Senator John Thune is speaking now. He's just been explaining that the reason why Mark Zuckerberg is here, the reason why Facebook is here, is because of a breach of trust. He's laid it out in such simple language. Let's hear a little more of what he's saying.
To ensure that third parties don't obtain data from unsuspecting users, while necessary, will actually serve to enhance Facebook's own ability to market such data exclusively. Most of us understand that whether you're using Facebook or Google or some other online services, we are trading certain information about ourselves for free or low-cost services. But for this model to persist, both sides of the bargain need to know the stakes that are involved. Right now, I'm not convinced that Facebook's users have the information that they need to make meaningful choices. In the past, many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have been willing to defer to tech companies' efforts to regulate themselves. But this may be changing. Just last month, in overwhelming bipartisan fashion, Congress voted to make it easier for prosecutors and victims to go after websites that knowingly facilitate sex trafficking. This should be a wake-up call for the tech community. We want to hear more, without delay, about what Facebook and other companies plan to do to take greater responsibility for what happens on their platforms. How will you protect users' data? How will you inform users about the changes that you are making? And how do you intend to proactively stop harmful conduct instead of being forced to respond to it months or years later? Mr. Zuckerberg, in many ways, you and the company that you've created, the story that you've created, represent the American dream. Many are incredibly inspired by what you've done. At the same time, you have an obligation, and it's up to you, to ensure that that dream doesn't become a privacy nightmare for the scores of people who use Facebook. This hearing is an opportunity to speak to those who believe in Facebook and to those who are deeply skeptical about it. We are listening, America is listening, and quite possibly the world is listening too.
Thank you. Now, Ranking Member Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Grassley, Chairman Thune. Thank you both for holding this hearing. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for being here. You have a real opportunity this afternoon to lead the industry and demonstrate
Dianne Feinstein now taking up the questioning. John Thune, interesting comments there. A suggestion almost that the Facebook model is on trial at the moment. On one side, this question of profitability and openness, and on the other, the job of protecting the privacy of users. We'll have more from here shortly, but for now, it's back to you in London, Kathy.
Back to the Facebook hearings, back to Kylie Morris in the committee room now.
John, Dianne Feinstein's just been speaking, really going through the entire Cambridge Analytica backstory, indeed quoting Alexander Nix from our undercover filming, talking about how he bragged about the work that CA had done on the Trump campaign. Now, though, it's gone back to Chuck Grassley, the chairman of the committee. Let's hear a little more of what he has to say.
And your location based upon your mobile device. It is no secret that Facebook makes money off this data through advertising revenue, although many seem confused by or altogether unaware of this fact. Facebook generated $40 billion in revenue in 2017, with about 98% coming from advertising across Facebook and Instagram. Significant data collection is also occurring at Google, Twitter, Apple, and Amazon, and even an ever-expanding portfolio of products and services offered by these companies grant endless opportunities to collect increasing amounts of information on their customers. As we get more free or extremely low-cost services, the trade-off for the American consumer is to provide more personal data. The potential for further growth and innovation based on collection of data is limitless. However, the potential for abuse is also significant. While the contours of the Cambridge Analytica situation are still coming to light, there was clearly a breach of consumer trust and a likely improper transfer of data. The Judiciary Committee will hold a separate hearing exploring Cambridge and other data privacy issues. More importantly, though, these events have ignited a larger discussion on consumers' expectations and the future of data privacy in our society.
After the break, we bring you the latest from those Senate hearings. Mark Zuckerberg is facing questions on Facebook.
No phones. No shooting. You are not allowed to bring any sticks in or leaves.
Most like, you can't really do anything.
We've got a whole new class starting at our school. Would you like to meet them?
I was expecting children, and then it was our parents.
What is 107 minus 32?
I keep giving her the easy ones.
That's 107 minus 30.
I'm not telling you now.
I feel so stupid. I shouldn't know this.
He's 50, he's dabbing.
I'm not having somebody speak to me like that. No chance, I'm a grown woman.
Class of Mum and Dad, tonight at 8 on Channel 4.
Welcome back to Washington on a momentous day for the internet itself and for Facebook. While we've been on air, the hearings have got underway. He's been appearing in front of the Joint Senate Committee. Let's go back to those hearings.
Technology developed for this campaign, end of quote. So the effectiveness of these social media tactics can be debated, but their use over the past years across the political spectrum and their increased significance cannot be ignored. Our policy towards data privacy and security must keep pace with these changes. Data privacy should be tethered to consumer needs and expectations. Now, at a minimum, consumers must have the transparency necessary to make an informed decision about whether to share their data and how it can be used. Consumers ought to have clear information, not opaque policies and complex click-through consent pages. The tech industry has an obligation to respond to widespread and growing concerns over data privacy and security and to restore the public's trust. The status quo no longer works. Moreover, Congress must determine if and how we need to strengthen privacy standards to ensure transparency and understanding for the billions of consumers who utilize these products. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, good afternoon. Let me just cut to the chase. If you and other social media companies do not get your act in order, none of us are going to have any privacy anymore. That's what we're facing. We're talking about personally identifiable information that, if not kept by the social media companies from theft, a value that we have in America being our personal privacy, we won't have it anymore. It's the advent of technology, and of course all of us are part of it. From the moment that we wake up in the morning until we go to bed, we're on those handheld tablets. And online companies like Facebook are tracking our activities and collecting information. Facebook has a responsibility to protect this personal information. We had a good discussion yesterday. We went over all of this. You told me that the company...
So come on, what does this all mean in real life? As well as dealing with increased scrutiny from politicians, Facebook's public profile has taken a terrible knock. Calls to delete Facebook and demands for greater regulation have wiped billions off Facebook's share price. But will it change people's day-to-day interaction with the platform? I found a mixed reaction here in Washington to what's happening. Young users telling us they're so wedded to Facebook they could never give it up, whilst older users are more wary. Activists have gone further, articulating demands for reform in cardboard on the congressional lawns. Capitol Hill this morning. A few humans about, but a field of cardboard Zuckerbergs urging Facebook's reform. This is the closest I've got to Mark Zuckerberg. We've been asking him for interviews over the weeks since we broke the story on Cambridge Analytica, but he's shown a marked reluctance to speak to us. I'm standing amongst 100 Zuckerberg bots, which have been brought here by a campaign group that are determined to get him to mend Facebook rather than destroy it.
what we're calling for is, one, to tell the truth, submit to an independent audit so we understand the scale and scope of the fake news problem, to ban the bots, and to fund an army of fact-checkers around the world who are going to stop the contagious problem.
In the university quarter of this city, I discovered amongst millennials some disquiet over Facebook's activity. Are you on Facebook?
Yes, I am.
Are you on Facebook?
Absolutely.
So, are you affected at all by anything you've heard in the last 3 weeks since Channel 4 News broke this story?
Yeah, I've definitely, especially after everything happened, I have, changed the privacy settings. Yeah, who can see my stuff, who can't.
What about the image of Facebook? I mean, if in any sense there was some agency about the Facebook, Cambridge Analytica producing perhaps the outcome of the election, would that worry you particularly?
Absolutely, yeah. It means that, we don't know the extent that it, the power it has.
And, yeah, it makes me deeply uncomfortable. It would only take a couple thousands of votes to, flip a few states.
We're from British Television, and we're trying to find out how people feel about Facebook with Mr. Zuckerberg in town.
I think that this is a bit of a tipping point in terms of getting the whole society involved in actively thinking about how their data is being used online. For free companies, if you aren't paying for it, you are the product, essentially.
But here's the rub. Yes, they're worried. But for many millennials, Facebook is so embedded in their lives that despite the harvesting of their private doings, however uneasily, they admit it is a price they're prepared to pay. These disclosures over the last few weeks haven't made you think, oh, I wonder if I ought to go on with this?
Definitely, they have. But what are you either you disconnect your Facebook and try and keep it connect with people, I guess through text messages and emails and whatnot, or you just use the most easy platform to do all of that.
Are you on Facebook?
Yes.
Do you worry about people getting hold of your data?
No.
Not at all?
Not really.
No.
All our lives have been online, so for us it's just kind of another problem that we've lived through. I can't imagine what would have to happen for everyone to say, I will not use Facebook anymore.
We're joined again, as we were at the beginning of the program, by Mindy Finn of Stand Up Republic. What do you feel, just very quickly, on the developments in the Trump scandal? Is this terminal, or are we in big trouble?
Oh, this is quite serious. It's highly unusual for a warrant to be applied to a lawyer.
Before I talk about the steps we're taking to address them, I want to talk about how we got here. Facebook is an idealistic and optimistic company. For most of our existence, we focused on all of the good that connecting people can do. And as Facebook has grown, people everywhere have gotten a powerful new tool for staying connected to the people they love, for making their voices heard, and for building communities and businesses. Just recently, we've seen the Me Too movement and the March for Our Lives organized, at least in part, on Facebook. After Hurricane Harvey, people came together to raise more than $20 million for relief. And more than 70 million small businesses use Facebook to create jobs and grow. But it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. And that goes for fake news, for foreign interference in elections, and hate speech, as well as developers and data privacy. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry. I started Facebook, I run it, and I'm responsible for what happens here. So now, we have to go through all of our relationship with people and make sure that we're taking a broad enough view of our responsibility. It's not enough to just connect people. We have to make sure that those connections are positive. It's not enough to just give people a voice. We need to make sure that people aren't using it to harm other people or to spread misinformation. And it's not enough to just give people control over their information. We need to make sure that the developers they share it with protect their information too. Across the board, we have a responsibility to not just build tools, but to make sure that they're used for good. It will take some time to work through all the changes we need to make across the company, but I'm committed to getting this right. This includes the basic responsibility of protecting people's information, which we failed to do with Cambridge Analytica. So here are a few things that we are doing to address this and to prevent it from happening again. First, we're getting to the bottom of exactly what Cambridge Analytica did and telling everyone affected. What we know now is that Cambridge Analytica improperly accessed some information about millions of Facebook members by buying it from an app developer. That information, this was information that people generally share publicly on their Facebook pages, like names and their profile picture and the pages they follow. When we first contacted Cambridge Analytica, they told us that they had deleted the data. About a month ago, we heard new reports that suggested that wasn't true. And now we're working with governments in the US,
and that, of course, was the heart of Channel 4 News Revelations. That's all we have time from here on this momentous day in Washington. From Kathy in London, from me here in Washington, that's Channel 4 News.
Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg faced the music today from American politicians over the use or misuse of personal data. It started well enough with one apology after another. Among them, we have made a lot of mistakes in the running of the company, Mr. Zuckerberg said. But as senators got into more detail, he struggled to defend Facebook from attacks about breaches of privacy. Facebook investors, however, seem to think that he'd done a good job. The share price went up 4.5% as he gave his evidence.
He started his company with some friends at university. 14 years and billions of users later, Mark Zuckerberg found himself at the heart of America's democracy, delivering an apology.
We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry.
Mr. Zuckerberg is in Washington to explain how the personal details of Facebook users were collected without their permission by a data analysis company, Cambridge Analytica. That company denies any wrongdoing, but there are concerns here that the data may have been used to influence the outcome of America's presidential election.
Do you think that you have an ethical obligation to notify 87 million Facebook users?
Senator, when we heard back from Cambridge Analytica that they had told us that they weren't using the data and had deleted it, we considered it a closed case. In retrospect, that was clearly a mistake. We shouldn't have taken their word for it, and we've updated our policies and how we're going to operate the company to make sure that we don't make that mistake again.
This hearing was conducted by people who perhaps wouldn't count themselves amongst the Facebook generation. The senators had been heavily briefed, but they still had some basic questions.
Well, how do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Senator, we run ads.
I see.
And yet Mr. Zuckerberg's inquisitors weren't slow in getting to the heart of the matter.
Would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
If you've messaged anybody this week, would you share with us the names of the people you've messaged?
Senator, no, I would probably not choose to do that publicly here.
I think that may be what this is all about.
The smiles didn't stay for long, because what's at stake here is deadly serious for a company built on the vast, unregulated online space. To protect people, to protect society. The question hanging over these hearings, how to govern the internet. Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
There was a quiet note of defiance in Mark Zuckerberg's opening statement to US legislators this evening. The billionaire boy, who, as he explained, started the world-dominating business in his college dorm, insisted he's always intended Facebook to be a force for good. There may not be many ready to hear that voice of idealism right now. Indeed, if Facebook emerges from tonight's hearing unscathed, it may say more about the level of ignorance many legislators have of the actual working of the social media site than anything Zuckerberg can say to redeem his errors with it. Well, Zuckerberg is still answering questions tonight. As you can see, he started at UK time around 7:30. He's been going steadily with a few short breaks. And he will return tomorrow. He's admitted he made big errors and said one of his greatest regrets was his slowness at uncovering fake news. But he resisted the idea Facebook was a monopoly and couldn't say if Facebook continued to track web browsing after a user had logged off. Our technology editor, David Grossman, has been watching for us.
The President of the United
United States!
The US Constitution requires the most powerful man on the planet to come to Congress every now and again and tell them what he's up to. It's called the State of the Union. So far, a man who's regarded by some as even more powerful has declined to do something similar, sending executives in his place. However, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg could turn down the invitations no longer. The growing scandal around Facebook's use of personal data and political manipulation has meant he's been compelled to attend. Today, he began 2 days of hearings where he's being questioned on the state of his network. For a hearing partly about loss of privacy, having 50 lenses pointed straight at his face was perhaps an appropriate start. Mr. Zuckerberg looked like a nervous man doing his best not to look nervous.
We welcome everyone today.
After opening comments from the joint chairs, the Facebook CEO rattled through a pre-scripted apology.
But it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. And that goes for fake news, for foreign interference in elections and hate speech, as well as developers and data privacy. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry. I started Facebook, I run it, and I'm responsible for what happens here. To proactively remove
Although Mr. Zuckerberg never really looked comfortable, in turn the senators never really looked much threat. He did, when questioned, promise more action on election interference.
You know, there are people in Russia whose job it is to try to exploit our systems and other internet systems and other systems as well. So this is an arms race.
The attack was somewhat blunted by the short time each senator got and their at times apparently limited grasp of the issues.
You said back then that Facebook would always be free. Is that still your objective?
Senator, yes, there will always be a version of Facebook that is free.
Well, if so, how do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Senator, we run ads.
I see.
The weapon that seemed to work best against his well-drilled answers was folksiness.
This way, if I buy a Ford and it doesn't work well and I don't like it, I can buy a Chevy. If I'm upset with Facebook, what's the equivalent product that I can go sign up for?
Well, there's the second category that I was going to talk about.
I'm not talking about categories. I'm talking about, is there real competition you face?
Would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
As you might expect from a committee of more than 40 senators, questioning wasn't exactly consistent. While some Democratic senators were concerned about Facebook helping elect Donald Trump, some Republicans were concerned about Facebook apparently censoring conservative opinion.
To a great many Americans, that appears to be a pervasive pattern of political bias. Do you agree with that assessment?
Senator, let me say a few things about this. First, I understand where that concern is coming from because Facebook and the tech industry are located in Silicon Valley, which is an extremely left-leaning place. And this is actually a concern that I have and that I try to root out at the company, is making sure that we don't have any bias in the work that we do. And I think it is a fair concern that that people would at least wonder about.
Let me ask, do you know of those 15,000 to 20,000 people engaged in content review, how many, if any, have ever supported financially a Republican candidate for office?
Senator, I do not know that. No regulation.
What is clear from the tenor of today's hearing is that American politicians are rapidly losing patience with the idea of tech self-regulation. Mr. Zuckerberg's ordeal is continuing right now in the Senate, and tomorrow he faces more questions from members of the US House of Representatives.
That was David Grossman. So where does tonight's grilling leave Mr. Zuckerberg and Facebook? Does company and others like it face further regulation? And what form could that take? I'm joined from Los Angeles by John Taplin from the University of California. He's written a book which takes on the major tech companies. In San Diego is Mari Smith. She's one of the world's leading experts on social media data and marketing, known by some as the Queen of Facebook. Welcome to you both. Mari, I'm going to start with you. What did we learn tonight? How do you think he performed?
I thought he performed amazingly well. He's very composed, confident. His answers were thoughtful. He looked somewhat nervous to begin with, but he seemed to be gaining more confidence as the questions came along. And there were some tough questions in there. I was very happy and proud to see how he did today. So
John
far.
Taplin, did you buy his opening statement that he is basically an idealist? He brought optimism to the business and thinks of Facebook still as a force for good?
Well, I think if I heard one more time him talking about his dorm room, I would have thrown up. But no, I think Facebook is a profit-making organization that is in the surveillance capitalism business. And the problem of these hearings today was that very few senators really understood the business. You know, when Lindsey Graham was asking him about was he a monopoly, he totally pushed the question aside. But Facebook, between Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger, Facebook controls 75% of all social mobile media, and you know, it's obviously a monopoly. There is no substitute product.
Mari, do you buy that it's essentially a pretty unethical way of making money, harvesting data, using very directed advertising? Possibly, John's point, the legislators themselves didn't quite understand what they were accusing him of half the time, but the questions for you, for tech experts, still remain.
I agree with John that the legislators really came across, quite frankly, as clueless about how Facebook works. And I don't think it's unethical at all. I've been on Facebook 11 years, and I've always said, caveat emptor, do not put anything online that you wouldn't want on the front page of a newspaper or found in a Google search in years to come, or proud for your own mom to see.
You're unusual, though, aren't you? I mean, most people do.
Yes.
Most people think of Facebook as the place where they can share particularly direct personal messages without getting targeted or without them being leaked, right?
Privately, yes.
I think
Let me bring John in.
I'm playing Farmville. I think I'm playing a little game. Little do I know, not only am I giving away all my data, I'm giving away the data of the 3,000 people who have friended me. And they didn't give any permission to that.
So is there a viable...
I mean, now they've fixed that, but it's still a big problem.
Okay.
And when Blumenthal went after him, he had no answers for it.
Mari, I guess there are two questions now. One, what kind of regulation is available? And two, the perception is whether people will trust Facebook again to use it.
Exactly. Well, the legislation component is going to be around that informed consent. So this massive, in fact, one of the senators held up this huge, 3-inch thick terms, and nobody reads it. So to dial that down and make it so much easier for users to say, oh gosh, okay, this is what I'm sharing, this is what's happening when I'm using Facebook, and how advertisers or third parties might be utilizing that data. And the sentiment, I have every confidence the sentiment will increase, the trust will improve. It was interesting to see the stock actually grow by over 4% even during the first hearing today. And I'm confident. In fact, I'm telling most of my clients and students it's business as usual, because Facebook does offer this incredibly granular targeting advertising.
That's got to be right, hasn't it? I mean, if you're looking at where the power lies, does it lie with these befuddled politicians who are asking about all sorts of things, chocolate bars and advertising and Bitcoin, all the rest of it? Or does it lie with the man they're accusing, who is probably 6 steps ahead of them already?
Totally.
Well, first off,
let me just ask John.
Europeans have passed GDPR. That is a general data privacy regulation, which will, if it's adhered to, change Facebook's business radically. That means that users have the point of opting in or opting out of giving Facebook their data. That would make a huge difference in Facebook's business right now. What I heard was a few politicians pushing, such as Ed Markey, for an American version of GDPR. If that happened, that would change Facebook's business. And although Zuckerberg pretended he was okay, he would never commit to saying he would be okay with that. But the larger question is this. Many senators, including John Cornyn, asked him, are you responsible for what's on your platform? He said yes. And that means that the safe harbor liability provisions, which make it impossible for us to sue Facebook for putting up jihadist videos, or same with YouTube.
Okay.
Has no point to be in there.
Let me just put that one to Mari then. So this is the big question now. Does he have to move from publisher to editor? Does he have to take some editorial responsibility for what appears on that site, even with 2 billion people using it?
He does. Zuck has absolutely pushed back for years that they're not a media company. However, if you've got over 45% of Americans get most of their news from Facebook, and it is a publishing platform, I do think that they do need to comply with rules around, you know, being a media company. Absolutely.
Thank you both very much indeed. Thanks for joining us here on Newsnight.
Let's move on to other events in the US tonight. Mark Zuckerberg has been giving and is still giving evidence before congressional leaders. It's been fascinating to hear him. Are we learning more, do you think?
Not really. I'm not entirely sure that we are. It has to be said, he is quite a master of theatrical contrition. I mean, he's been doing it the entire time. Of course, he did it, I think it's at Face Smash or whatever, which is the thing that came before Facebook, which was really set up to say, which of these two people do you think is more attractive on your campus? And of course, instantly got him into all sorts of trouble. This is where Facebook came from. And he did the apology for that. His first public apology came before Facebook was even invented. He's now made several. I mean, over the years, he did it when the news feed was introduced without really consulting anyone. He's now doing it again. He has to, I have to say, he looks sort of very unhealthy. He looks absolutely horrified by the situation in which he's found himself in. But in terms of concrete details, I'm not sure we're getting very far. And I have to say, I haven't heard all of the testimony, but the standard of questioning that I've heard him being subjected to is not of the highest calibre.
There seems to have been a shift, though, in the responsibility that he's prepared to take for what is on their platform, the content, in other words, no longer saying it's a neutral platform. They should have responsibility for their content, and they did not take broad enough responsibility. They thought initially they were creating tools and people could do what they wanted with it, but actually now they need to take responsibility for how those tools are used. So it does seem that there is a shift. You're smiling at me because I know newspapers want them to take responsibility as publishers, but this is, you know, perhaps there is a shift as a...
There's a shift in his rhetoric. I don't think that they ever thought this is a truly neutral platform. I just thought that they thought that was a useful defence for them to deploy rather than anything else. I think in the background, I very much doubt that privately they were using that kind of language at any stage.
The whole Face Smash thing, though, it has to be said that he created that when he was still a student at Harvard.
Sure.
So, you know, it's amazing that it turned into such a huge thing, which ended up in this situation. If you think about it, this is a company not very old at all. The people involved in the company are not very old. This started as something that they created sitting in their student hostel bedrooms, right? And then it's grown and grown, and it's
well, 40 billion we heard tonight, 40 billion annual turnover, 2 billion active monthly users, and he says 20,000 people by the end of the year who'll be working out what's on that platform.
Right, and
with AI dictating some of the things they can take off if society dictates.
Right, so it's actually turned into something big, something so big that they themselves couldn't have imagined in any way, shape or form. I think something he said was quite interesting. He said, you don't go to creating a company this size from just a hostel bedroom and not commit any mistakes. I think that's probably right.
He's had a long time, though, that they've been at this sort of level. And for a long time, he's failed to take any responsibility for what goes on there. If you remember what they've done with news products, they have basically tried to almost cut off news products at the knees, really, by bringing them into Facebook, but they took absolutely no editorial responsibility for what was going on. If you remember a while back, they had a program that removed the famous picture from the Vietnam War of the naked child running away from the napalm. Now, this was a classic example. Any news editor would tell you, of course, this is not an image that has anything to do with paedophilia, but according to the algorithms that were being used on Facebook, naked child means it goes. There was no responsibility, no human judgment behind what they did. They kept that myth of, oh, we're just the neutral platform upon which all of this takes place, and that just doesn't hold up. And I think he's had years to deal with that, and he hasn't. And this is the situation that he now finds himself in.
Yeah, lots more from Washington on that, no doubt.